Hi, this is Christina McNamee from At Properties. Today is Monday, May 4th, and today I am going to take a look at our first full month in quarantine, which was the month of April, to look at how the shelter in place affected real estate activity in all of Chicagoland for the month of April 2020 in comparison to the month of April 2019. So I'm going to share my screen here. So MRED, which is the company that provides the MLS, which is the main source of the real estate listings in Chicago, have put together weekly snapshots. So I'm just going to point out some of my favorite statistics when looking at the market. So our first slide here is going to talk about new listings in all of Chicago. When you look at this graph, you see these green bars, which are indicative of 2019 new listings, and the blue bars are indicative of 2020 listings. So when you look at the beginning of this graph, like the last week of February here, this first week of March 2nd, March 9th, you can see that the new listings on these blue bars were trending upwards. You can see that these are new listings were going about 18 to 19% more in 2020 than 2019. But then when you look at the week of March 15th, and if you remember, the bars and restaurants closed on March 17th. The shelter in place was instituted on March 21st. You start to see the new listings start to go down. So here we are, the first week of shelter in place here on March 22nd, second week, and these new listings are down around 49, 50% for the first 3 weeks of April. You can see the blue is down about 50%. However, if we move into this like last week here leading up to today, the new listings are only down around 31%. So this kind of shows us that the curve here is starting to trend upward. So the worst of it was kind of just in these first 3 weeks of April, where new listings were down about 50%. Our next slide is going to talk about under contracts. So again, the green is our 2019 data, blue is our 2020 data. So when we look at these first weeks here, February, March 2nd, March 9th, under contracts were trending 25% higher. More properties were going under contract in 2020 leading into March. And then we get into March 15th. This is St. Patrick's Day weekend, March 22nd, shelter in place, and you start to see the under contracts drop, which the week of March 30th, April 6th, here's our low points where under contracts were down around 50, 55% in 2020 during the shelter in place. But when we move towards this past week, you can see that the under contracts are starting to go up in 2020. And this last week, it was only down 19%. So the worst of it was, again, that first couple weeks in April, where new contracts are down in the 50, 55% range. However, now we're back up around 19%, just around 19% down. So not as terrible as some were predicting. Next slide here, and I only have 2 more. We're going to look at showing activity. So real estate agents in Chicago have the ability to track their showings using showing time. This is how I schedule my showings in the MLS. So when agents want to see my property, they go into showing time and schedule it. I get the notification and I accept it. So this is indicative of all the agents that are using showing time, which many of them do. So as we look at this graph, you can see the navy blue line is showing activity for 2019, and the orange line is showing activity for 2020. So this is starting in January. You can see January, February, 2020 showing activity was higher in 2020 than 2019. So this was showing that 2020 was set to be a very active spring market. And then once we get over here into like, here's March 10th, here it meets here on March 14th, right around that St. Patrick's Day weekend. And then you see that orange line, which is showing activity in 2020, take that nosedive as we go into shelter in place. And then showing activity bounces along the bottom pretty much the whole month of April. Then you start to see here mid to end month that the showing activity starts to tick upwards. And then here, May 3rd, it's actually right at the weekly average. So if I was a betting woman, I would bet that you'll continue to see this trend, this orange line trend upwards. And then my very last slide, which is everyone's favorite, is pricing. So everyone wants to know, how has shelter in place affected real estate prices? So I'm only on this graph going to be concerned about the average sales price, which is these orange and yellow numbers up here. So the orange line is average sales prices, and this is for all of Chicago for 2019. And then the yellow line, which is actually right above it, is your average sales price for 2020. So if we look starting in February 20, the week of February 24th, the average sales price on this yellow line was trending just higher than 2019. So here we are here. This is when the shelter in place, sold price was still higher. You can see average sales price was 304 in Chicago for 2020 in comparison to 280 in 2019. Here's like our second full week in shelter in place, still trending upwards. And then you just see it at the very end of April, it pretty much matches. And then this last week, it's pretty much even. So even though new listings were down, like 50%, new contracts were down 50 to 54%, and even showings were down, the real estate prices were not affected. So that is the market snapshot for April in all of Chicago. I'm pretty happy with the results, and if I was to predict how the real estate market's going to go for the next 30 to 60 days, I think it's going to be kind of a slow and steady wins the race. I don't think that once this is lifted that you'll see a huge influx and double digit, increases in pricing or showings or listings. I think it's going to be a slow, steady trajectory in a upwards trend. So thank you for watching. Stay safe out there, support one another, and I'll see you next week.